Hi, I'm Sonia.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Lane.
And I'm Tom Henschel, and together we're unlocking leadership. We're three experienced executive coaches with three very different points of view. In every episode, we take a question from a client and we provide key insights to address their challenges through our three different perspectives. It's a holistic approach to understand challenges and opportunities. And so we're going to get right to it. Our question today comes from Dave in Atlanta, who writes, I'm an EVP at a large organization. HR informed me that the results for my division in the employee engagement survey had gone down significantly this year. They suggest we engage an executive coach to help us rebuild engagement before we announce our restructure plans. What would you recommend in this situation? What a question, Sonia. What would you recommend in this situation?
Well, Dave, thank you so much for your question, because this is not a good place to be, particularly when you're an EVP. And I'm sure that there's been probably better engagement scores in the past if it's actually gone down. And congratulations to your HR department for saying engage an executive coach, because this is going to require several different steps. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, are you surprised? We've had a very, if it happened the last couple of years and the last year, you probably are not fully back at work yet. So we've all had to adapt to a different way to communicate and engage with each other. And that creates quite a few challenges. And so the question then becomes, are there conversations that you had with the immediate leadership team once you knew that you were going to have to be primarily remote about what practices or what approaches they might want to take in order to maintain the level of connection that everybody had had in the group prior to having to go remote? Because there was many things that we were going to have to adapt. We were going to have to adapt how much time we were going to be spending with people, because you don't have the ability to go around the water cooler or go together to lunch or all that kind of stuff that helps build the engagement and helps take off, if you will, the steam when there's a lot of stuff going on that creates a lot of tension. The second thing is, if there was areas of the business that were being impacted negatively, was there any candid conversations that you had either with specific areas of the group that you had, or did a town hall with the group that you had? Because when there's this much uncertainty and they can see that the numbers are going down, the self-talk becomes, I'm going to get laid off. Things really, really bad. So they're not performing at their best. They're scared. And in order to build trust in a time when there is a lot of bad news, we've got to talk about it. We've got to be able to talk about it in a way that allows us to both show that we are informed, we understand what's probably top of mind for them. We may not have a plan, but we are working on plans and we want their ideas, but we can't be silent in that particular situation. And then thirdly, I guess I would say is, if your company is going to be restructuring, then there has been many changes that have occurred. When anything is coming down, something new is always opening up. So potentially there is a chance to start sharing about the opportunities that are going to be available to allow for people to be able to understand that there's a future. My concern whenever engagement goes down is either something happened that caused people to finally get disconnected and they don't have anything to connect to. People can connect to visions. People can connect to a culture. And particularly if in that culture or in that business or in that vision, I can see myself being part of it in the future. By now, at this particular point in time, we all know that everybody's business model in many ways is changing. So it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that's part of your group, but they may not know what your plans are. they may not know what that means for them. And we need to be able to bring up that trust meter by being able to share and be candid. I'll leave it there for now.
I'll chime in. Dave, again, thank you for this question. You are going through a lot of change. You've just been through a lot of change in the past year, and change breeds disconnection to an extent, especially if there's not enough communication. And then with the addition now of a restructuring or reorganization, you've got additional change coming up again. So engagement is really important in order to be successful and to keep and retain your top talent as you're moving forward through this process. So kind of taking a step back, I applaud HR for wanting to introduce a third party to help you guys help build up that engagement. So my first question to you as the executive vice president, are you open yourself to being coached? And do you believe in executive coaching in addition by having you believe in it and being an advocate who can then help your leaders be a part of that? So that would be my first question to you. Secondly, I would really like to see you get together with your teams and your leaders to find out if they could kind of guess or itemize what they feel helped contribute to this past downfall of your engagement. Because if by better understanding as a team what occurred, obviously, was it going through virtual platforms? Was it fewer people coming in the office, fewer one-on-one conversations, fewer in-person conversations, fewer team collaborations, whatever they might be? It's important that everybody jointly recognizes those, so then you can be able to address them and move forward. And third, if you do all agree to have the executive coaching, which I do think is a really great idea, I think it's important to start with a baseline. Where are you guys today on your engagement levels? And I'm sure that survey provided that. But then number two, where would you guys like to go? Have a goal in mind as a team. And then number three, what is your timeline to get there? Because I'm sure you don't want to wait forever for that restructuring. And it's really vital in order to keep your top talent that you've got a plan in place, a timeline in place, and kind of benchmarks along the way to see how you guys are progressing on the engagement piece. So I'm going to pause there and we'll turn it over to Tom before I add more.
Well, I'm going to come from a completely different place on this. I mean, Kimberly and Sonia, I wonder what this is going to sound like to you. So let me tell you how this sounds to me. I see this all the time where something just happened to me with a guy up in Minnesota where the engagement survey came back. He's been there like 7 years. He's gotten 7 of these. And there was a big dip in his numbers in this one thing. And he was all anxious about it. I was like, wait a second. What do those numbers mean? I mean, literally, like, what happened? So I want to say, I don't think it's a coaching problem yet because we don't know what the problem is. And somehow the way the letter was written made it sound like HR thinks that the restructuring is part of the fix to the engagement problem, to which I go, wait, why does HR think they know what the problem is? Do they know what the problem is? Do we really know what those numbers mean? So I want to say to you, Dave, that I think one way to approach this is go out and listen. Go ahead and figure out what those numbers mean, because you don't know what they mean. And I don't think HR really knows what they mean, other than the fact that, like, oh, the numbers are low. But it's like, well, you don't want to be reactive to that. You don't want to go in and fix something until you figure out what's broken. So that's where I come from on this. It's too early for coaching, I think. So that's a really different place than where you were going. What do you think? I don't know.
Well, I think we were making the assumption that the problem was there just based on the last what's happened in the last year. I mean, yeah. So I mean,
in which case, I don't think anything needs to be fixed. It's not time to reorg like that's going to fix COVID. And it's not like engagement is something that Dave is somehow responsible for. So, you know what I mean? It's like, if the numbers are down because of COVID, then I want to say, I would ask HR, are they down across a lot of divisions? In which case, it's not really Dave's problem.
Well, I would disagree with you on that.
Good, bring it on.
And here's why I disagree with. Okay, so I'm assuming that. So let's go to the very beginning. Let's assume that in designing this particular survey for engagement, they really put in meaningful questions that matter to what are the priorities and the values of that culture. And that,
I hope so. Yeah, I agree. I hope so.
So there should be some way to be able to look at where it was that the numbers went down and understand what does that connect to. So if now I agree with you, there's times when you have questionnaires that can be purposely confusing. But the other thing that I will say is when you are confused, even answering a question that you answered before, you might be coming at it very differently. And so the question then becomes, is it what has changed? If the question has remained the same, either the person in responding to it is now reacting to that question differently and assessing things at a different place, or many things in the environment have changed that definitely are influencing why it is that's happening. So I'm not so big about dismissing the number. I'm more concerned about being able to understand in the context. I agree with you, Tom, that we need to understand what does it actually mean? You know, and did it come down by 10% and everybody else came down by 5%? You know, so there is a relative understanding how relative it fits to the rest of the organization. I don't know about whether the transformation that they need to do is as a result of this survey, but I do think that I don't know of any organization right now that isn't looking and asking different questions of the business and of their future, because
well, but then that has nothing to necessarily do with an engagement survey.
So right? that right, it doesn't have anything to do with the engagement survey, but per se, but in the back of the mind, when I'm not feeling secure, I may be looking at things very differently. And so that may affect the mindset of from where people were coming to and answering the question. But this is a big dilemma. And so I can see where Tom immediately jumps to maybe executive coaching in a formal style of executive coaching is not, if you will, the silver bullet right now. But I do think that as an executive coach or executive coaches that we would be able to create, if you will, a framework for him to host some of these meetings and some of these conversations with his team, to be able to sort of arrive at either specific tools that we can make recommendations about or specific approaches that he might consider.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of why I touched base on it. It's important for the people in the room, i.e. the people that eventually be coached, to first be able to have a voice about what they feel. If they feel and agree that the engagement has gone down, what do they feel have contributed to it? And it's pretty much, if you look at, some of the resources that Gallup does a regular engagement survey on a regular basis. And I had the privilege to talking with the director of talent kind of 6 to 8 months into the whole pandemic. And we were kind of talking about the fact that if you were just a mediocre average leader doing your job with your team, checking in periodically on sales numbers, project timelines, project deadlines, you did okay. But then all of a sudden, when you were pushed to go to a virtual remote environment where now you almost have to be a psychologist, you have to have huge empathetic skills because people are homeschooling. They've got dogs and cats and kids running across their lap. They're dealing with so many more stresses and uncertainty of just what the world's going to be like. You now as a leader have to have all these other soft skills, so to speak, and sensitivity to your people. And if you didn't have a one-on-one kind of a somewhat of a caring, if you will, relationship with your employees, you all of a sudden just bridge that, created a gap that used to be this way when you were just the average leader to now being this far apart. And no wonder the engagement drops. And you're doing it over something that is not a naturally way for people to connect via emotion from a digital platform. It's the best we can, but still inhuman and in-person human connection, as I passionately believe in, it does leave a gap for people and feeling connected. So there's a lot to digest here. So
there is. I want to add one last thought, which is at least last for me, which is I think, again, my experience is like when this guy in Minnesota showed his climate survey to me, I've been looking at these for a long time. I've seen lots of them in lots of different companies, and they're just numbers. But to find out what is behind the numbers requires some energy. In the same way, by the way, I mean, how many 360s leaders have gotten through? I had a woman who was given a 360 that was like 40 pages long, full of numbers. And she was like, what do I do with this? And I was like, oh my God, you sue your HR department is what you do. Like, that's like malpractice. That's horrible. And nobody debriefed it with her. But I just want to say that those kind of reports need interpreting. And just because it's there, it's not like looking at the sales chart or whatever you're used to looking at. This is different data. And so I think to treat it like data that you actually don't know, I'm speaking to Dave now, not Kimberly and Sonia, you guys know it. But, for Dave, like, even as an EVP, I understand you see these all the time, but I bet you've never been able to peel it back and looked at granular and kind of see what it means.
Mhm.
So there you go. Don't take a low number as meaning anything. We don't know what it means.
But I kind of want to, I like what you just said there. All the numbers are tools. All they all are tools to start a conversation. And Sonia touched on this, is that the conversations have to be very transparent. They have to be very open and even challenging to an extent when you've got the others in the room. It's got to be open communication about why you think engagement, how are your people feeling? What do you think we need to do? Are you open to coaching? What do you not like about it? I mean, it's got to be really meat heavy conversations about what do we really think there's a problem? What do we think the problem is? What do we want to do about it? Are we able to do anything about it? And as an executive coach, going to help us, right? Which I do believe from a facilitator, from a consulting perspective, and the whole tool pieces, they definitely can. But you have to have that kind of mastermind team together to bring out all the issues so that everybody adopts them and moves forward. Otherwise, there's no cohesiveness. There's no engagement with your own team. How can you build engagement with the rest of the organization?
Yeah. A couple of things that I do want to mention that I think, or Tom, did you have something that you wanted to say?
No, I was just like pointing at Kimberly going right on.
As an executive coach, I have not given an online 360 in over 12 years. They're all interview 360s. I have 7 questions. I get to the specifics, and I know what is going to go into that development plan. So one can take a look at a report and come up with about 4 questions that can be a follow-up to a survey like this that will get to the very specifics. And that can be conducted by an outside source, like an executive coach, to get at some of the themes, because it's the themes that I end up sharing, because I think that's a better approach to, if you will, develop a leader. But the other thing I'm going to point out that I've seen as a coach during all this time, and when we're doing remote, like we're doing now, it's very hard to have effective and constructive conflict conversations. And yet there's a lot of conflict that still goes on because it never goes away. I always say, as long as you're in business, there's either going to be not enough time, not enough people, not enough something. And we're all going to be vying for certain things. Our ability to have that conversation constructively is really important. And so potentially we may uncover that in following through about what's really going on, it may be just one area that needs to be addressed. Potentially, how do we handle conflict in an effective way? Because we haven't been able to get to that. The other thing that it sounds crazy, but it has happened to somebody that I'm actually coaching right now. People drew conclusions about how they were doing with her because of her expressions on the video. And the difference is when this person actually is thinking, they tend to look away, not at the camera. And in some cases, they furrow their brows because they're thinking, they're focused on that. People are now interpreting that as, or sometimes this person will do this as they're trying to think things up. And everybody immediately assumed she doesn't like what we're doing, whatever. So there is many situations that are going on right now that can contribute to misunderstanding. And we need to get to a new place where we can open up the pathways for understanding. Anyway. That's
Yeah, and then especially understanding communication, especially if you're going into a reorg or restructuring, over communication is not even a word that's even possibly can be used in that situation. You need to over communicate as much as possible, because when people don't have answers, guess what? We make up the worst answer, which Sonia alluded to, is usually I'm not going to have a job at the end of the restructuring. I'm the first one to go, or I will be gone in the next 3 months, right? So I just think, especially with your leadership and the leadership with the leaders with their people, communication about the process, what's going to happen, what's going to look like in the end as much as possible. And that whole trust factor is going to be really key in whether you glide through that challenging time successfully or not, still with your key people intact. So with that, we will say thank you, Dave from Atlanta, for your question today. We hope you, our viewers and listeners, gain new insights on how to recapture engagement post-dramatic change and uncertainty, and in preparation for more change like reorganization or even restructuring. Additionally, if you like the content we shared today, please like this episode, or also share and subscribe to our YouTube channel called Unlocking Leadership askthecoaches.com. If you have a leadership question or really would like to reach out to our coaches, please find our contact information and our website in the show notes. Thanks for joining us today. Tune in next time to find the keys to unlocking your best leadership.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.